Hello, it's John Lord here again, and today we're going to talk about a secret subject in gardening, a subject nobody ever wants to talk about. It's weeds. And a lot of the gardening programs, you think, when you watch everything being planted and everything coming on great, you would think a weed never existed. But in fact, weeds over the generations, weeds were our greatest threat to human civilization, because when you plant crops, the good soil that makes the crop grow is also the soil that makes the wheat grow. So all through the ages, if you wanted to grow food, it was always a competition between man and the weeds, and it's no different today. Now, I'm not going to mention chemical weed killers of any sort. Never. This is chemical weed killer free zone. It's not going to ever be mentioned. And anyway, you couldn't put chemical weed killer there because you'd kill everything. Roses being particularly susceptible. But when we have a look at the problem here, these are a few roses we planted. Actually, we did a video, ground cover roses, and we had to redo the edging. We have to revamp this piece here. Now, but look at all the weeds that have come up, and I can generally identify them, and that's Nepelobium, a willow herb from, actually it's the one from North America. We have, this is an Erigeron, believe it or not. This is a very nice plant, but it's in the wrong place, so I suppose technically it could be classed as a weed. We might pot a few to sell. And we have Nettle, start of a nettle, which if it was left alone for a few years, you'd have a nice big nettle patch. We have a bit of knotweed, which is a very common weed in vegetable gardens. And we have a weed that gives a lot of trouble. It's creeping buttercup. And what else have we got? We have a little bit of dockleaf. So what we're going to do is we're going to show the way we control weeds here, because the important term is control. They'll always be with us, like taxes and death. We'll always have weeds, and we just want to control them. Now we're going to do a little bit of hoeing. Worse, not a lot, just a little bit of hoeing. We're not going too bad, because I'm not going too mad because they're small. Just a little bit. Here we are here. Over here, we've a different weed. We've a little bit of bittercress, which is actually edible, quite nice actually. You can, but no one ever eats it. But can be a nuisance of a weed. But and here we have, this is not a weed here, so you have to be careful. This is a lovely white viola. Okay, we've given that a fairly basic clean up, and if you notice, the ground is fairly level, and we'll film from here. The reason why, because this is the relatively new edging, and we leave a bit of a gap. You see, there's a bit of a gap. You don't have the soil right up. You leave a gap, about maybe 2 inches, an inch, 2 inches, and then we go and we're going to put bark on it. And we use bark to control our weeds, and we use a mini chip bark, and I'll explain how it works. First of all, it's relatively expensive. The cheaper mulches that you can buy that the municipal authorities sometimes produce can have a lot of weed seeds in them themselves, so you have to be careful. Now, the great advantage of bark, it's dark. Now that's very important. It's darkness, believe it or not, because it doesn't allow light to penetrate any distance. And it's most little weeds, they need the stimulus of light to germinate. Their seeds, most weed seeds, they have to be on the surface, and they need light. So this blocks the light from the soil. Now the second thing it does, and probably the more important one actually, and the one actually that can annoy people as well, because, and this is important, and we put a bit on, and just to show, it moves, it doesn't lock, and as a result of it moving, each piece is not attached to the next piece. So if a weed seed lands on top of the bark, when it rains, weed seeds get washed down to a lower level, and then it can't get any light, so it doesn't germinate. Where if you had a very fine mulch that locked together, it would act like for instance, if you were to put moss peat on as a mulch, that would act as a seed bed, and it would have any amount of weeds growing on it. So that's how we do it. And we have as a result, we have very little weeds, and the occasional weed we just pick out by hand, and it looks quite nice. We'll just do that. We'll just do another little bit. If we're doing big areas, we put out a big piece of rigid plastic and throw them onto the plastic and just shovel the stuff on. And as a labour saver, we worked out that it actually pays for itself. Now it's important, don't have big humps and hollows in your soil, because you'll have to use the mulch to make up the difference, and that makes it expensive. So have your soil fairly level. Don't have your soil like this, have it fairly level. And the other thing is, don't put weed barriers down with this stuff. You're better off using weed barriers, by and large, using these plastic weed barriers for shrubs, but not for herbaceous, because they can't spread underground, because they get trapped, they get caught with the barriers. Now we do it the easy way. Now the blackbirds are a bit of a nuisance at times, and they can push them, and they can push it out onto the paths a bit. Blackbirds, but that's blackbirds for you, and blackbirds are worth the trouble. Anyway, that's John Lord from the Weed Front doing his best to keep them at bay, but in the end of the day, weeds always win, because they play the long game. Now there's one other piece I neglected to mention, and it was, what do you do with perennial weeds? Now perennial weeds are weeds that are in the soil for more than 1 year, because they don't flower and die and set seed, and the following year it's different plants. No, it's the same plant, and they build up a lot of biomass below the ground, like bindweed and scotch grass and ground elder. And because of that, if you were to mulch, if there was scotch grass, say, in this border, and you were to mulch that with bark, it would thank you for it very much, because it would come straight up through the bark. Wouldn't have any effect in it, and it would actually help it. And the same for bindweed. So for bindweed and scotch grass and ground elder and all those things, you have to have them completely removed from your garden before you start. Otherwise you're wasting your time. And it's worth putting a lot of, as we did in this place, we had a lot of scotch. We put a lot of work in the beginning to clear all our perennial weeds, and then after that it was, we were laughing. It was just a roller coaster. It was dead easy. If you get rid of your perennial weeds, gardening is 10 times easier. And don't let anyone else tell you otherwise.